So just a little bit of background for me. I work with the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, and I'm with the Water Resources Division. And I'm in particular, I'm in the non-point source pollution program. And our program works on a watershed basis. And what we do is we work with communities and stakeholders throughout the state to protect and most importantly, restore our rivers and lakes. And we do that through a collaborative approach and we call that the watershed management approach. And so when we do that on different scales, and on your scale, you're looking at the Lake Lansing scale. The other one small thing I wanted to mention too is Barney Boyer is also with us. He's also with Eagle, and he is the non-point source district staff that covers the Lansing district. So I just wanted to mention that. So for other questions about, I don't know, different, most local questions would go to him. So one thing I want to mention quick is when I think about Lake Lansing is when you start looking at Lake Lansing, it's a big task. And the first slide that I have is through the Lake Conservation Planner tool that the Midwest Glacial Lakes Partnership completed. It's on a regional scale in terms looking at different lake data. And so how we came up with this for Lake Lansing is we look at two different things. Looking at the watershed level disturbance is these two things are really critical to look at: the watershed level disturbance and the shoreline disturbance. And when you look at the shoreline disturbance, you're looking at the first like 100 meters from the lake edge and back. The watershed is all of the land area that drains into Lake Lansing. On this scale, Lake Lansing is at a 66% shoreline disturbance, which is really high in the red. It doesn't take much to get into the red. And you're looking at about 10%, 10, 15%, 10, 20% to start getting into that red. And that includes mostly highly intensely developed. And when you start highly intensely developing, you're looking at seawalls, you're looking at a lot of docks, you're looking at a lot of other impervious surfaces on the land, and very little natural vegetation. So it breaks up this connection between the lake and the land. And that's a big impact for aquatic organisms that use the lake, that live most in the lake and need the land for certain things, or you're on the land. And the thing about this slide is that when you start looking at, okay, we're at like 66% disturbed, what do we do? The next piece of that is, well, how much effort do you put into restoration or mitigation or protection? And when you look at protection, those protection efforts are, what are those high quality areas that you still have left and remaining that we want to keep that? The next thing is like, okay, what do we do to solve our problem or lessen the impacts of this development? And that's really kind of where you're at, is like, okay, there's a lot we can do and there's different varying levels that we can do. One thing I want to say, oops, hold on a second. Okay. One of the key things that I really think is important for all lakes to do is what's called a shoreline inventory. This gives kind of a perspective on the whole lake. And this is an example of a green belt, or the buffer strip rating was really about the first 35 feet. That tip of them at Watershed Council did on Burt Lake. And this is just for the green belt rating. They also have one for erosion levels and seawall levels. Where they have is the worst part is where that says the absent. The erosion and seawalls will have big red marks as well. And so what that does is it gives you an indication of where you need to spend your time and efforts on restoring those aspects. And if you do a shoreline inventory like this, you can then set goals on like, okay, so we only have like 20% of our wetlands left, or 20% of a really good buffer left. The rest is, we need to make some improvements. So then you can target your areas of where you can start having some conversations and making some improvements. Oops. Okay. So in the Shoreline Stewards program, this is the Shoreline Stewards program is part of the Michigan Natural Shoreline Partnership, which began in 2008. And we started that to really promote healthy lakeshore erosion control practices instead of seawalls. The seawalls are just horrible for the lakes. And then when we expanded the Shoreline Stewards program, it's a homeowner assessment. And we look at the whole lake. Okay. Just want to make sure you can still hear me. If you give a thumbs up, I can see Cameron's on the camera. Can you hear me, Cameron? Or nod? Okay. Okay. So this gives an indication of where we want to move from, like all lawns and seawalls and highly impervious surfaces, and move more towards how do we recreate some of this habitat. Couple things is, and when talking with Leroy, we look at, okay, we have some different options that stretch what we call the continuum of options, looking at what's on the land and what's at that immediate shoreline as well. Because there are different landowners and there's different needs, there's different desires. And what we, our goal is to really push that envelope, because our goal and our need is that lake and to protect that lake. And we also want to think about, okay, how do we share that shore to balance those aspects of recreation and access. Oops. So this was an example of a lakefront property over on the east side of the lake or state, and they just kind of took some of the principles of adding in more vegetation. There were still some like old landscaping, non-native plants, but this person added in native plants and reduced their lawn. So this is a really good example of, well, how do you reduce the lawn and still have that? It's like, well, I have some landscaping and it's not native, but we don't say like remove everything. Okay. Oh, sorry. Hold on a second. Okay.
We lost your screen.
Yep. Hold on a second.
Okay. Thank you.
There. Is that good now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Okay. So back to, this is a really good example of how to integrate some non-native already existing landscape and taking the native landscaping and reducing lawn. And this person was able to take the Shoreline Steward survey and qualify at a silver level. Oops, hold on a second. This was another example of completely removing lawn, and there was already some existing landscape, and you're looking at, okay, we have a pathway down to the lake. Well, how do we do that and not have lawn or not have concrete as well? Oops. This is an example up in the northwest part of Michigan. This this was a before picture of a property that had a concrete seawall. There was a lot of wave action. It was starting to fail. It was, the waves were undercutting and on the point. And then there's one property to the left. because I know Lake Lansing has a lot of seawalls, and it can be expensive to replace certain seawalls, but it can be done. And in certain cases, it is practical and it's feasible as well. So this is the after picture. Where you see all of that rock riprap is that second property that was out on the point, and they decided to take their seawall and put in this what we call dump the rock. So basically you just pretty much take rock and you dump it at a certain slope. It's not placed properly and it's not sized properly to recreate a good, what we call run up and more natural slope. The property on the left, what they did is they installed like a rock in a way that has a natural slope, and they integrated native plants and what we call a bio core log. This property has been in place for over 10 years. And what you can see, what's really indicative of what we're trying to accomplish is if you see the waves here, the waves are starting to break over in the natural shoreline before they even hit that natural shoreline. And when you see the property out on the point, the waves are hitting that point and all of that rock. So there's a different wave energy dynamic here. And the goal we're trying to do is get the waves to break over before they hit that shoreline. And it can be done if it's designed properly. Oops. So this is another like example. I just found like kind of a right after construction. This site was out on Muskegon Lake, which is extremely high energy. This site is actually very close to Lake Michigan. And there was a lot of erosion going on. There's houses right next, very close to the lake, steep slope, and they kind of rebuilt the shoreline with using a lot of rock, some logs, and what we call soil lifts as well. And the most important thing is vegetation and a lot of shrubs. And the goal is there was a lot of ice issues as well. So even on inland lakes that have ice problems, where it tends to be a homeowner complaint, is creating a natural slope that allows that ice to run up the ramp, as we say, because the ramp will end up breaking that ice under its own pressure. Horizontal ice can have a lot of pressure and can impact shorelines significantly. However, naturally running up a slope, you can help break up that energy of that ice as well and mitigate those impacts of ice. So I just, wanted to just mention too, here's our the Shoreline Stewards program. This is an individual property program. It's online. It's an assessment where each individual landowner can look at their overall management of their property. And what we try to do is try to say, do the shoreline inventory first and see where you're at, and then kind of target these properties to do their individual assessment that looks at the whole property. It doesn't have to be that way, but this is one of those kind of outreach options that all lake associations can do. And then as part of this process, if landowners register, they end up with more information where you get some general recommendations for improvement. So one of these kind of things, looking at your whole Lake Lansing approach is, looking at what Leroy and his team has put together is, okay, how do we break this up and create some demonstration sites as well to encourage people and inspire people to do different things of like where they are coming from. Sometimes it only takes like a small garden of like a 5x5 or 20x20 garden. It's like, wow, that's really pretty. I want something like that. It's understanding kind of your target audience and where some of their motivation comes from. Some people really are into birds. Some people are really into fish. Some people are really into butterflies. Or some people are just like, I just don't want to mow my lawn. So just kind of, looking at, and that's why I suggested like looking at when you're thinking about some of these demonstration activities, or different types of properties, is look at what's out there first, which is, I did see one of those suggestions is like, let's find those people that are already doing the things we want them to do. And when you start looking at social survey, I'm gonna stop sharing here. They look at what we call the, when you hit this critical mass, and there's this curve of like, there's like the first 15%, like talk to those people, and those people are the people that are already doing it. And the people that's like, I just need some information to like tell me how I can do, because I'm really interested. When you get this first like kind of 15-20% of people, that critical mass, you start reaching that critical mass, and you start changing that culture. A lot of people say, look, how do you deal with these people that are just, they don't want to listen to you, they don't want to hear you, they don't want to hear anything you're saying. And what this curve tells you is like, those people are way over on the other side. And a lot of people spend their time and energy on those few people over there. What we try to say is spend your time and energy on the positive aspects of the people that are interested in listening to you, just need a little bit of extra information, and start building from there. It does take time, and in small steps, you'll get there. And every little small thing helps. My favorite like quote that my motto that I like to use is, not everyone can do everything, but everyone can do something. So when you look at your overall approach, is kind of think about it in those terms. So that's all if there's any questions or ideas or whatever, I'm happy to take questions, or any other ideas that you want to throw by me. And if I have any comments, I'm totally willing to offer any ideas.
Thank you, Julia. That was great. We recorded this, and if you do have a question for Julia, if you could step up to this mic or over here, she can hear you a lot better. And we'll just do this for 5 or 10 minutes, and then get on with your large agenda. So thanks for bearing with the conversation.
Yeah, that was good presentation. Thanks, Julia. I do have a question. I happen to have property up north, and it's got a seawall. But I guess is this something that I guess it's not? I mean, it works so far, but I know the issues. Can you maybe go over again why the seawall is not good? You mentioned a good point about amplifying the wave energy, but other than that, what other? I mean, when people call us, we try to explain to them what kind of convincing answers you could maybe elaborate on, like bullet points. Seawall does this, seawall does that.
Could you?
Did you catch that, Julia?
Mostly. Is it about explaining
this
more?
This microphone is.
Yeah. Is it more about? Was the question?
What are the problems with seawalls?
Sure. Okay. So what happens with seawalls is one of the primary issues is that it breaks up that land and water interface. So for example, turtles need to be able to get out of the lake to be able to lay their eggs. They're about maximum height that they can actually climb over is about 6 inches. So when you start seawalling your entire lake, it limits those areas where those turtles can actually get out of the lake and onto the land. So, and then when you reduce those areas significantly, it areas where raccoons and skunks know exactly where they are laying their eggs. So it'll significantly decrease your turtle population and impact that turtle population. And some turtles need like almost a mile to be able to, from the lake, to go lay their eggs. So from a wildlife standpoint, that's a big part. And then when you start looking at the wave energy, so when it comes in and hits that wall, that energy does not disappear and it doesn't dissipate. It has to go someplace. So what happens is that the waves come in and hit the seawalls, and the energy goes downwards, and that causes bottom scouring. So a lot of times what you will see, and it all is depending on, every situation is different, but a lot of times what you see is that the lakes tend to be deeper in front of the seawalls because there's downward scouring, and that downward scouring takes that sediment and resuspends it into the lake, and that resuspension causes turbidity, and it ends up resuspending not only the sediment but nutrients as well, particularly phosphorus. The other thing is there was a lot of tends to be wildlife habitat there, like fish habitat, frog habitat, and turtle habitat there in those near shore areas that is eliminated because of seawalls and that wave scour. The other thing that it does is that the wave energy goes sideways, and that's called wave flanking. And that wave flanking ends up causing erosion on a neighboring property. So that neighbor then thinks, oh, I need a seawall too. If you go out in nature, nature doesn't build seawalls. Nature doesn't build lawns. Like if you go out and you see a lake that doesn't have any development, the one thing you will not, or there's two things you will not see. You will not see a seawall, nor will you see any lawn. Because lawn is not, there's no turf grass up to the edge of lakes. It's just not a natural thing. So what we're trying to do is, and humans have made an immense amount of changes that causes erosion, or that I guess elicits erosion and creates changes around the lake. And we call that accelerated erosion, because lake shorelines do naturally erode, but it's over a greater period of time, a time much longer than we normally see, that's beyond our typical lifespan. And so there's slow changes. When humans come in and change the system, it creates accelerated erosion. And so that's what we're dealing with. And people tend to think it's like, oh my gosh, I see erosion happening, I need a seawall. And that's not the case. That's one of the things that the Shoreline Partnership is trying to educate people about, and trying to train contractors to how do we do these alternative measures as well? How do we recreate this natural run-up, this natural shoreline that both protects our shorelines from erosion and creates this more natural connection between the lake and the water? It can be done. We are doing it. There are people out there that are doing it. There are healthy ways to do it. And it's a challenge, but it can be done. On the Shoreline Partnership's website, there is more information about there. And we actually have some graphics. And then there's also some really short video clips too that show the action of kind of wave scouring. And there's another one about the aquatic vegetation as well, of the aquatic plants. And not every lake is designed to, or not every lake naturally has aquatic vegetation in front of every property, but where it is naturally there, that aquatic vegetation actually absorbs some of that wave energy before it hits the shoreline. So that's one of the other human impacts that happens, is that people eliminate all of that natural aquatic vegetation like lily pads and rushes, and that takes away one of the first lines of defense. And so that opens up the arena, is what essentially opens up the arena for those waves to come in and hit those shorelines and start eroding. And then they see, it's like, oh, there's lawn at the edge, and that lawn is not designed to be there. The roots are very weak, and so that wave energy starts eroding, and it starts undercutting those lawn roots, which are only about 3 to 4 inches deep. Oh, yeah, great, thanks. So there's, and the other major complaint that
this is
tends to
Roger.
be
Oh, I got
on,
another question.
oh, go ahead.
Hello there, I'm Roger. I'm Julia. How you doing? Hey,
Great.
listen, you were kind of breaking up in the
Okay.
beginning there. Has anybody done a shoreline inventory of Lake Lansing? And you said something about percentages. I heard a little bit about 66% is seawalled, is that right? And 20% is wetlands. Has anybody done a inventory of Lake Lansing? That's my question.
Okay. So, real quick, as far as I know, a shoreline inventory has not been done on Lake Lansing. Ways that can be done is by through the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program. It's through the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring / MyCore program. There is an actual score the shore parameter that can be done. I know Tip of the Watershed Council. I also work with them, and they have a whole protocol of doing their own on a parcel by parcel basis. In regards to the 66%, that wasn't specific to the seawall percentage. That was specific to more of that shoreland disturbance, which takes in a lot of different factors within that first 100 meters. It might be the way that the fish biologists did it is they looked at different research and land use parameters, and then they put it into all of this like algorithm information and came up with, oh, well, there's a whole quadrant of information. There's more information on the Glacial Lakes partnership of how it came to be, but so it's not interpreted. It's like, oh, 66% of Lansing is seawalled. You would have to actually go and do an actual on the ground inventory to be able to determine that. Although, you know, there might be, Lake Lansing has a public access, obviously it's a public access lake. DNR might have something like that because DNR has done some status and trends lakes and done some shoreline inventorying. So that they might have some results on it, but very, very few lakes have actually a specific percentage on hardened shorelines.
Julia, I wanted to thank you again. Are there any final questions for Julia? And if not, are you willing to respond to questions by email if people think of something after this meeting?
Absolutely.
We've got a fairly full agenda tonight, and if you could just share your email, and we will stay in touch. Hopefully,
Okay.
really appreciate that, and also for Barney for tuning in and introducing us to Barney.
Barney just shared his email in the chat box, and I'm getting to it as well. Kirkwood J at Michigan. And I would highly encourage people to check out the Shoreline Stewards program. We do have promotional information out there as well.
Thanks for bearing with the technology, and yeah, we'll hope to talk to you again.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much.